Next up in my weapon videos is going to be the newly released Merrel weapon. He has finally been added into the game and is now offering the third melee troop type option in the archery contest recharge event. So you'll be able to unlock this weapon effectively for a 1000 BD recharge. And effectively, that makes him now the second cheapest source of Cav base attack in the game, unless you're including the likes of Seg's weapon, but for Cav-specific weapons, it will be Rob from the Fiery Mines and then Merrel from this recharge event. I know he was very heavily requested because of that, because getting Cav base attack was a bit trickier. You can see there's just less Cav weapons than there are of the other unit types, and the recharge event obviously had Haley's weapon and Garell's weapon, so it wasn't offering all three like we saw in the Fiery Mines, but now it has been added, and naturally it will have a purpose purely because of that base attack source. But the primary question I'm going to go over in this video is, how good is this weapon, and exactly how much better does it make Merrel's Awakening ability? So I have here my sheet going over all the details of this. You have Merrel's stats at the top here. He, of course, only gives Cavalry stats, which will be a bit of a recurring theme as I talk about this, because he is only usable in the Bleed synergy, and that's so biased towards infantry with Rhea, Sinara, and the like, that this will pose issues, but Cav Bleed is, of course, viable in its own right, even if it's not as min-maxed as Female is for Cavalry. You have here every stage of his weapon. His base 4-star ability will provide a 50% chance to trigger a crit with a relatively low damage coefficient for all 5 lineups every time each Cav lineup does 4 normal attacks. Something to note with this, and this is consistent even with the weapon, is this 4 normal attacks line in his ability description here does not count extra attacks from Sinara. So if you hit with your Cav on, say, the 5th second, the first time you hit your enemy, and then every single line procs 3 times from Sinara, you would then have effectively done 4 normal attacks on every single Cav lineup, but it doesn't count the reprocs. You'd have to have 4 of those normal attacks, which could trigger these reprocs for this to actually count. And across a fight, when I've looked at this in Rebel groups, just testing around with it, this will end up normally at 6 triggers in total, and it'll be 6 triggers on all 5 lines with a 50% chance, so effectively 2.5 crits every time this actually procs, which will be a total of 15 crits per fight being provided from Merrel, and that will be consistent all the way up to 4 stars. 6 triggers will be the standard for Inf Cav from what I've tested. It can go up to 7 potentially if you're sending Mono Cav, and the numbers could very slightly increase if so. When you unlock the weapon and equip it, the only difference you're going to get to his base ability will be this 20% increase to the crit coefficient. So it'll be 20% more damage on the crits themselves, and of course the crits then become bleeds, which will deal the exact same amount of damage that the crit does, just over 5 seconds. So effectively that jump from no weapon to base weapon will be 2 times 20% as an increase. So 40% times 15, which is 600% damage coefficient, which maps out to the approximate damage increase of 6 normal attacks, which isn't a trivial amount if you're already using Merrel in your formations. On the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd stars, you're only getting a increase to the health increase that Merrel is providing, and it's fairly trivial when you consider it's only proccing about 6 times a fight. It is extra stats, but what's really valuable here will be the damage coefficient you're getting. And then on the 4th star, you're once again going to get another 20% increase to this crit coefficient, so it's the exact same. In terms of a jump, it'll be a jump from the base weapon of an additional 6 normal attacks in terms of a damage increase. And for a total, if you're looking at it from no weapon to 4-star weapon, of an additional 12 normal attacks as an equivalent damage increase, which, whilst not great, is actually fairly decent as far as some of these cheaper weapons go. There are much, much worse weapons than this. Haley, for example, in the same recharge event is significantly worse than this. Haley is basically the same thing, but without the damage increase, you're just getting the health increase, so she's very poor in comparison. And you can see down here in the left, I have the average bleeds caused, depending on if you just have base 4-star Sinara or 4-star Sinara with 4-star weapon, and of course, it'll be anywhere in between these two numbers, depending on what stage you have Sinara's weapon up. And the amount of bleeds that Merrel is actually providing is actually quite significant. It's not a trivial amount at all, like actually more than 4-star Rhea will be giving with Sinara without weapon. The issue with this, as I list in this top part of this box here, is the crits and therefore the bleeds will scale off your cavalry damage. So even if you're trying to run a build that's really trying to min-max the amount of bleeds you're getting, it's all relative to how much damage the crits do. And if you're running, say, Imp Cav, you're naturally going to have better stats than the infantry troops, probably, just because of the commanders involved with Sinara and Rhea. Their weapons, they're going to be locked into Imp base attack and stuff like that. And you're probably going to have more of those infantry troops too. And of course, the more troops you have, the more damage they're going to do. So in the context of an Imp Cav lineup, even if you get a lot of bleeds through Merrel, they're not going to do a lot of damage. The crits will be fairly low, and therefore the bleeds will be fairly low in damage. So for him to actually be properly valuable, you're going to have to be running him in full Cav mid-spender bleed setups, since that's where you'll actually get proper damage from the crits, you'll get proper damage from the bleeds as a result. And also these health increases, which only affect the cavalry lines, will also get value then. If you are running Imp Cav, you're going to want to make sure you have a decent amount of cavalry units there for his bleeds to actually do anything. The issue of that is you're then effectively nerfing all your infantry bleeds from Rhea or whatever. And this will just follow another trend where monotype formations tend to just rule nowadays. You can't mix and match what you're going for or dilute your stats at all because the opportunity cost is just far too high for it to really be that optimal. Because even in the situation of, say, you're running your bleed synergy and you're running into another infantry player who you just can't quite beat, so you want to run Cav into him as well just to cover that counter, just to get over him. Perhaps Imp Cav with Merrel will be better in that situation, but just full Cav with Merrel will be even better than that. So it is a bit awkward in that sense. But for mid-spender Cav bleed, or if you're just a bleed player who wants to be able to flex into a Cav off build, and you've invested into things like Rhea weapons, so you want to stick with bleed for that Cav off build rather than swapping to female, Merrel actually, even with base weapon, is pretty good actually. The amount of bleeds he causes is quite surprising. You just have to keep that in mind that yes, he can cause a lot of bleeds by himself, but you have to make sure those crits and bleeds are actually doing significant damage for them to really matter in reports themselves. So overall, it's quite a good weapon in my opinion. It does make him significantly better. He's just a bit niche in his use as a commander, but for that niche, for mid-spenders, I do actually think he's fairly good. And of course, lots of players will be recharging for this purely for the Cav base attack, which will always have value even if you're not putting that weapon on Merrel himself.